The wedding was just 3 days away, and time was running out. Her freedom depended on what happened next. Amaka paced around her room, her heart racing. Her last plan had failed miserably, and Chief Mado had doubled the guards around her. It seemed impossible now. Escape was nothing more than a fading dream. But Amaka was determined. She called for her mother late that night, her voice barely a whisper through the small crack in the door. Mama, we have one last chance. If Chike can create a distraction, maybe, just maybe, I can escape during the confusion. Mama Kechi hesitated. Amaka, are you sure about this? The wedding is in 2 days. If this plan fails, there will be no second chance. I know, Amaka replied, her eyes fierce, but I can't give up. Mama Kechi promised to get word to Chike. The plan was simple but dangerous. Chike would cause a distraction at the market square during the wedding procession, giving Amaka a chance to flee. The message reached Chike and he agreed. He couldn't bear the thought of Amaka being taken away from him forever. It was risky, but it was all they had. On the morning of the wedding, the village bustled with activity. Drums echoed through the streets, and villagers gathered to witness the grand event. Chief Obinna stood proudly in his royal attire, his face glowing with triumph. Amaka was dressed in a rich red and gold wrapper, her face covered with a delicate veil. But beneath the elegance, her heart was pounding with fear. This was her last chance. As the wedding procession moved through the market square, Chike made his move. He threw a basket of palm kernels onto the ground, causing a commotion as people tripled and fell. Screams filled the air as market women scrambled to get out of the way. Amaka took a deep breath and bolted, her feet flying across the dirty road. For a moment, she felt the wind on her face, freedom just within reach. But the moment didn't last. Stop her! Chief Mado's voice thundered through the crowd. Guards chased after her, their footsteps closing in fast. Amaka ran as fast as she could, her veil flying behind her. Then she felt a rough hand grab her arm, yanking her back. Not this time, one of the guards snarled. Amaka felt, tears streaming down her face. Please, let me go. But it was no use. The guards dragged her back to the procession, where Chief Madu stood with clenched fist and a cold, unforgiving stare. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Amaka was forced back into the ceremony. Chike had disappeared into the chaos, unable to help her. The priest continued the wedding rite as if nothing had happened. Amaka's body was present, but her spirit was crushed. Each word the priest uttered felt like a dagger in her chest. Do you take Chief Obinna as your husband? The priest asked. Amaka looked at the crowd. Her mother stood at the back, her face streaked with tears. Chike was nowhere in sight. There was no way out. I do, Amaka whispered, her voice barely audible. Chief Obinna smiled in triumph. The deal was sealed. The festives continued late into the night, but Amaka felt like a prisoner in golden chains. Her life was no longer her own. The man she loved was gone, and she was now the wife of a man she despised. But deep in her heart, she knew this wasn't the end of her story. This was just the beginning. Amaka vowed silently, her fist clenched beneath her wrapper. One day she would take back her life. One day she would be free. For the first few months after the wedding, it seemed like things weren't as bad as Amaka had feared. Chief Obinna showered her with gifts, clothes, and expensive jewelry. She lived in a grand house with servants at her beck and call. For a brief moment, she convinced herself that perhaps she could learn to live this life. Chief Obinna took her on trips to neighboring towns where they were treated like royalty. Amaka smiled in public, always the perfect wife. At least, outwardly. Deep down, she was still broken, but she pushed the thoughts aside and tried to embrace this new life. But the bliss didn't last. One evening, after a lavish dinner, Chief Obinna's true nature began to reveal itself. He had been drinking heavily, his eyes dark and cold. He looked at Amaka, his lips curling into a sneer. You think you're special, don't you? He said, his voice slowed. Let me remind you, you are mine now. You will do as I say. Amaka's heart sank. I've always done what you wanted, she said calmly, trying to keep her voice steady. Chief Obinna laughed, a cruel sound that sent chills down her spine. You belong to me. Everything about you. Don't ever forget that. From that night on, the man who had once spoiled her became controlling and possessive. He watched her every move. She wasn't allowed to leave the house without his permission, and even her conversations with the servants were monitored. Amaka became a prisoner in her own home. The once grand house now felt like a cage. Her friends stopped visiting, scared off by Chief Obinna's temper. Even her mother and father were turned away at the gates. Amaka's world became smaller and smaller, suffocating her more each day. Her duty as a wife became increasingly demanding. It was draining and suffocating. If dinner wasn't served at the exact time, he would rage for hours. If she didn't dress the way he liked, he would remind her of how ungrateful she was. Amaka began to wither under the weight of it all. The vibrant, strong-willed girl she once was started to fade. But Amaka wasn't one to give up easily. Deep inside her, a spark still burned, a quiet but fierce reminder of who she truly was. One day, as she sat by the window staring at the distant hills, she realized something. She couldn't go on like this. If she didn't find a way out, this life would destroy her completely. And so Amaka began to plan again, not for escape, but for survival. This time, she wouldn't run. She would outsmart Chief Obinna one step at a time. Her first move was subtle. She started listening carefully to the conversations around her. Every word, every detail mattered. She learned who Chief Obinna's allies were and who secretly resented him. Slowly, she began to rebuild her strength, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. The battle for her freedom wasn't over, it was just beginning. The few months of bliss Amaka had experienced felt like a distant dream now. Chief Obinna's true colors became bolder with each passing day. His brutality knew no bounds, and his punishments grew worse with time. If Amaka so much as glanced at him the wrong way, he would strike her across the face without hesitation. The servants were helpless. They had long learned to stay silent or risk facing his wrath themselves. You belong to me, Obinna would shout after every beating. No one can help you. Not your father, not your mother, not anyone. It got worse when he started forcing himself on her, ignoring her desperate pleas for him to stop. Amaka wept in silence, her body and soul broken. Each time, it left her feeling hollow, a prisoner in her own body. Chief Obinna made sure Amaka had no one to turn to. He cut her off from the outside world completely. No visitors were allowed, not even her mother or her father, who once tried to visit but were turned away at the gates. Even the servants were forbidden from speaking with Amaka unless given permission. You have no friends here, Obinna sneered one day. You will learn to obey me or you will suffer for it. Amaka was not allowed to step outside the compound. The once lively young woman who loved the sun on her face and the smell of fresh air was now confined to cold, suffocating walls. Her world was shrinking, suffocating her. One evening, after another night of forced submission, Amaka sat on the floor in her room, trembling. Her body ached, her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. For the first time, she wondered if she would ever escape this nightmare alive. It was then that she overheard a conversation between Chief Obinna and his right-hand man. She will eventually break, Chief Obinna said with a laugh. They all do. By the time I'm done with her, she won't even remember her own name. Tears streamed down Amaka's face. The man she had been forced to marry wasn't just a bully. He was a monster. She thought about her father, the man who had handed her over to this life, thinking he was securing her future. If only he could see how far she had fallen. Despite Chief Obinna's effort to isolate Amaka, rumors began to spread in the community. The once radiant young woman was now a shadow of herself. People whispered about the chief's cruelty, though none dare confront him. Chief Mado grew restless with guilt. Every night he lay awake, haunted by the image of his daughter's bruised face, the very sight that greeted him the day he forced his way into the compound. He hadn't even spoken to her before Chief Obinna ordered him out, warning that if he ever set foot there again, he would be arrested. He had made a grave mistake and it was tearing him apart. But what could he do? Chief Obinna was powerful, untouchable, and dangerous. Any move against him could mean death, not just for him but for Amaka too. One night, after another brutal beating, Amaka lay on the cold floor, her breath shallow, her body was bruised, her spirit crushed. She closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer for strength. I can't live like this anymore, she thought. I have to survive, no matter what it takes. I will survive this, she whispered to herself, no matter what it takes. It was a rare occasion. Chief Obinna had decided to take Amaka out for an important event, a political gathering where he planned to show her off. Dressed in an elegant but suffocating gown, Amaka forced a smile as she walked beside him, hiding the storm brewing within her. This was her chance. A tiny window of opportunity had opened, and she was determined to seize it. On the way to the occasion, Amaka leaned back in her seat, clutching her stomach. Ah, my stomach, she groaned, doubling over. Chief, please, I need to get some medicine. I can't make it without it. Chief Obinna frowned. Medicine? Why didn't you take something before we left? I didn't expect it to hurt this bad, she gasped, clutching her side dramatically. Please, there's a pharmacy just ahead. It will only take a minute. Chief Obinna sighed and waved at one of his bodyguards. Follow her. Make sure she doesn't waste time. Amaka nodded weakly, hiding her racing heart as she climbed out of the car with the bodyguard by her side. Inside the pharmacy, Amaka scanned the shelves quickly, pretending to search for stomach relief tablets. Then her eyes caught exactly what she needed, a bottle of sleeping medicine. This one, she told the pharmacist, holding up the bottle. How strong is it? The pharmacist looked at her curiously. It's very strong. Just a small amount will cause deep sleep for hours. Amaka smiled faintly and nodded. Perfect. She paid for the bottle, slipped it into her purse, and grabbed a box of antacid tablets for cover. The bodyguard, unaware of her real plan, hurried her back to the car. Back in the car, Amaka carefully concealed the sleeping medicine, her mind working fast. She had only one chance to get this right. At the event, Chief Obinna was busy mingling with politicians and business tycoons, leaving Amaka to sit quietly at a table. Her eyes scanned the room, making mental calculations. When the food was served, Amaka knew it was time. She slipped the sleeping medicine into Chief Obinna's drink while he was distracted, making sure to stir it gently so it dissolved completely. Chief, you barely touched your drink, she said sweetly, trying to hide her trembling fingers. You are right. I need something to wash down this dry meat. Chief Obinna smiled half-heartedly. Amaka held her breath as he took a long sip. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Chief Obinna's eyes began to drop. He shook his head, trying to stay awake, but the medicine was already taking effect. I need to rest for a moment, he said, slumping in his chair. His guards thought nothing of it. He had been drinking all evening. Amaka seized the moment. She slipped away quietly, blending into the crowd, her heart pounding like a drum. She had memorized the exit route earlier. All she had to do was reach the back door and she would be free. But just as she reached the exit, a voice called out behind her. Madam Amaka, where are you going? Her blood ran cold. One of the guards had spotted her. Amaka turned slowly, forcing a weak smile. Oh, I just needed some air. Chief didn't give any instruction for you to leave, the guard said, stepping closer. Please return inside. Her mind raced. This can't be happening. The plan had failed once again. After being stopped at the event, Amaka had returned home in silence, her mind filled with frustration and fear. Chief Obinna had woken up hours later, grudgy and irritable, complaining of a terrible headache. He didn't suspect a thing, but Amaka knew her time was running out. Determined to escape, she decided to try again. This time at home in the dead of night, it had to work. The house was quiet. Amaka moved silently through the kitchen, carefully measuring the sleeping medicine. This time, she decided to add a bit more, just to be sure it worked. She prepared a cup of tea and added the medicine, stirring it slowly. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to stay calm. "This will be over soon," she whispered. Carrying the tea to the living room, she found Chief Obinna sitting on the couch, flipping through a newspaper. "Here, Chief," she said sweetly, handing him the cup. "This will help you sleep better." Chief Obinna took the cup without a second thought. He sipped slowly, then leaned back on the couch, his eyes growing heavy. Within minutes, he was fast asleep. Amaka stood over him, watching carefully. "Finally," she said under her breath. She tiptoed towards the front door, her heart thudding with excitement. This was it. Freedom was just steps away. But just as she reached for the door handle, "Amaka," the deep voice of one of the guards echoed from behind her. Amaka froze, her hand trembling on the handle. "What are you doing?" the guard asked suspiciously. I was just checking if the door was locked properly," she stammered. The guard narrowed his eyes but said nothing more. Defeated once again, Amaka turned back, her mind swelling with panic. She returned to her bedroom, trying to calm her racing heart. She couldn't fall again. Hours later, Amaka woke up in the middle of the night, her throat dry and her head aching from the stress. She sat up in bed, realizing how quiet the house was. She headed to the kitchen to grab a glass of water. Just then, she realized that Chief wasn't in the bedroom. Her eyes darted to the living room. The dim light from a lamp cast shadows across the room, and there he was, still sitting in the same position on the couch, exactly how she had left him. Amaka swallowed hard and tiptoed towards him. "Chief," she called softly, tapping him on the shoulder. "Chief, wake up." No response. She tapped him again, harder this time. "Chief," still nothing. His body was limp, his head slumped to one side. A wave of cold fear washed over her. She placed her hand on his chest. There was no movement, no breath. Amaka's heart stopped. "Oh my God," she whispered. "No, no, 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 no." She shook him violently, but it was too late. Chief Obinna was gone. A scream tore from her throat, echoing through the house. The guards rushed into the room, confusion and panic written all over their faces. Everything turned into chaos. Amaka stood frozen, trembling, her mind racing. What had she done? The house was in total confusion. Chief Obinna's lifeless body lay on the couch, and the guards were calling for help. The ambulance arrived and Amaka stood still as the paramedics confirmed it. Chief Obinna was dead. The news spread quickly. By morning, the entire town was talking about Chief Obinna's sudden death. The police were called to investigate. Amaka was taken in for questioning. "Madam, what did you give him?" the officer asked. Amaka's hands were shaking. I just added something to his drink to make him sleep," she admitted. "I didn't mean for him to die." Her words made things worse. Amaka was charged with manslaughter and locked up as they prepared for her trial. The courtroom was full, with tension in the air. Amaka sat in the dock, pale but calm. Her father, Chief Madu, sat in the front row, his face filled with regret and shame. The judge was about to give the sentence when Amaka raised her hand. "Your Honor," she said softly, "I would like to say goodbye to my father." The judge paused and nodded. "You may." Chief Madu stood and walked toward his daughter, his face full of mixed emotions. As he leaned in, Amaka whispered, "You sold me for wealth. Today I return your gifts." In one quick move, Amaka beat his ear and spat in his face. Chief staggered back in shock. Before anyone could stop her, she took advantage of the chaos and pushed past the guards, running towards the exit. The courtroom erupted in confusion. Guards chased after her, but Amaka was fast. Driven by desperation and the pain she had suffered, she ran through the crowded streets, her heart racing as she disappeared. For the first time in years, she was free, completely free. Chief returned home, carrying nothing but guilt. He had traded his daughter for money, and now he had lost everything. As for Amaka, she vanished without a trace. Some say she escaped to a faraway place to start afresh, far away from the nightmare of her past. Others believed she found a relative who kept her safe from the law. But one thing was clear, Amaka was a fighter. No matter where she went, she would never forget the cost of her freedom. Greed and the desire for quick money can lead to terrible consequences. Chief Madu's search for wealth blinded him to what was most important, his daughter's happiness. Amaka's story teaches us that desperate choices can have devastating results. True wealth is in love, family, and making choices based on kindness and honesty. Parents, love your children and protect them. Never trade their happiness for money. And if you're going through tough times, remember there's always a way out. Seek help, speak up, and don't let your circumstances control you. The end. If you found Amaka's story impactful, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below with your thoughts. What do you think about the choices she made? Subscribe to TaleTrek for more powerful African stories and hit the notification bell so you never miss any new story. Join the conversation and let's keep exploring stories that inspire, teach, and empower. Thank you for watching.